The morning sun cast long golden streaks through the towering glass windows of Carter Financial Group's flagship branch. The hum of business filled the air, keyboards clacking, printers whirring, hushed conversations between tellers and customers. It was the kind of orderly efficiency that Eleanor Carter had always envisioned when she built her bank from the ground up. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and black heels that clicked softly against the marble floor, Eleanor walked with an air of quiet confidence. She had spent years establishing herself as a leader in finance, overcoming obstacles that many in her position never had to face. Her reputation in the industry was formidable. She was known for her strategic mind, her relentless work ethic, and her unshakable commitment to fairness and accessibility in banking. Today, she was here for a simple reason: a withdrawal. She could have had her assistant handle it. She could have used one of her many business accounts. But there was something Eleanor always loved about being in the field, about experiencing her own company as a customer. She prided herself on knowing every detail of how her branches operated, down to how each employee treated the people who walked through those doors. It was a test of sorts. A way to ensure that the company she had built with so much care truly embodied the values she preached. As she approached the teller counter, she was greeted by a young man in his mid-20s. His name tag read Michael Davis. Eleanor offered a polite smile. "Good morning. I'd like to make a withdrawal from my personal account." Michael barely glanced at her before nodding mechanically. "Sure, I'll need your bank card and ID." Eleanor handed over the documents without hesitation. The transaction was routine. She was withdrawing $5,000, an amount well within standard withdrawal limits. She expected it to take no more than a couple of minutes, but instead of the usual swift processing, she watched as Michael's expression shifted. His brows furrowed slightly as he looked down at her ID. His fingers drummed against the counter. He glanced up at her once, then down at her card again, as if something didn't quite add up. "Just a moment," he said, his tone now carrying a note of hesitation. He didn't swipe the card. He didn't enter the transaction into the system. Instead, he paused, staring at the screen in front of him as if debating his next move. Eleanor remained silent, watching him carefully. She had seen this reaction before: the shift in tone, the flicker of doubt in someone's eyes, the hesitation that only seemed to appear when people like her, black, successful, well-dressed, but still not quite what they expected, made large financial transactions. Michael looked up again, forcing a thin smile. I'm going to need some additional verification before I can process this withdrawal." Eleanor's expression remained calm, but inside, a storm brewed. "Additional verification?" she repeated, keeping her voice even. Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am. For security reasons, we require extra steps for large cash withdrawals." Eleanor's eyes never left his face. "And what extra steps would those be?" Michael hesitated. "I'd need to see another form of ID, and possibly proof of income or the source of the funds." A cold silence hung between them. Eleanor had spent years ensuring that her bank followed fair, customer-friendly policies. There was no such rule requiring proof of income for a withdrawal of this size. She had also just watched another customer, a middle-aged man in a business suit, withdraw more than double her amount without so much as a second glance. And yet, here she was, being asked to prove that the money in her own account belonged to her. "Is there a problem with my account?" she asked again, her tone measured. Michael cleared his throat. "Not exactly, ma'am. It's just, we have to be careful with certain transactions." Eleanor let the words sink in. Certain transactions. Or rather, certain customers. The realization settled over her, a familiar weight she had carried for years. No matter how many degrees she had earned, no matter how many industry awards she had received, no matter how many millions of dollars she had secured for her company, she still wasn't immune. Even in her own bank, in a branch she had personally approved, she was being treated as a suspect instead of a valued customer. Eleanor straightened, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve. "I see," she said finally. She could have told Michael who she was, could have ended this conversation in a single sentence. But she wanted to see exactly how far this would go. She folded her arms and gave him a polite but firm look. "Please go ahead and call your manager." Michael's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Of course. Just a moment." As he hurried away, Eleanor turned her attention to the rest of the bank. She observed. She always observed. At the next counter, the businessman in the tailored suit was having a friendly chat with his teller. His transaction was being processed without hesitation. No additional verification, no suspicious glances. Across the lobby, a woman in casual jeans and a hoodie was being handed her money with a smile. No delays, no extra steps, no proof of income required. Eleanor took a deep breath, keeping her frustration in check. This wasn't new. But this time, she had an advantage. She had power, and she intended to use it. The bank employees didn't realize it yet, but they were about to regret every second of this interaction. A few minutes later, Thomas Whitman, the branch manager, emerged from his office at the back of the bank. He carried himself with an air of self-importance, his movements brisk, his expression confident, as if he had already decided that whatever issue was happening at the counter was nothing more than a misunderstanding he could easily sweep under the rug. Tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair neatly combed back, Thomas gave off the impression of a man who had been in the business for decades. The kind of manager who prided himself on running a tight ship, ensuring everything went smoothly, especially for the customers he deemed worthy of good service. Eleanor watched him as he approached, noting the subtle lack of urgency in his stride. He wasn't expecting trouble. Not yet. Thomas stopped just behind the counter and offered Eleanor a smile that was meant to be polite, but lacked any real warmth. It was the kind of customer service grin that people used when they believed they held all the power in the conversation. "I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal, miss." He glanced down at the ID that Michael had placed on the counter. His smile faltered slightly. "Carter, is it?" Eleanor nodded. Thomas straightened, regaining his composure almost immediately. He folded his hands in front of him, adopting a calculatedly professional tone. "Well, for security reasons," he began, "we require additional verification for large withdrawals, especially when we're not familiar with the customer." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, sharp. "Not familiar with the customer?" she echoed, her voice smooth but carrying an edge that wasn't lost on anyone nearby. Thomas hesitated for half a second, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, but he recovered quickly, adjusting his stance. "Yes," he said, clearing his throat. "As a precautionary measure, we need to ensure all high-value transactions are processed with the utmost care. It's simply protocol." Eleanor could see it so clearly now. He had no idea who he was talking to. She clasped her hands together, her voice deceptively light. "Tell me, Mr. Whitman, are you familiar with the leadership of Carter Financial Group?" Thomas blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Of course," he said, his confidence wavering just slightly. "I'm well aware of the executives." "Oh, really?" Eleanor interrupted, arching a brow. "Then you must know the CEO of Carter Financial Group?" Thomas's mouth opened slightly before snapping shut. A flicker of uncertainty flashed across his face. "Well, yes, Eleanor's lips curled into a knowing smile, one that made it clear she already knew the answer to what he was about to say. "Then I assume you recognize me." Silence. Michael's face had drained of color. He looked down, as if hoping he could sink into the floor and disappear entirely. Thomas's eyes darted to the name on her ID, then back to her face. Eleanor could practically see the realization hit him like a freight train. His posture stiffened, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. This was not just any customer. This was the CEO of the entire institution, the woman whose name was printed on every paycheck in this building, the woman he had just attempted to humiliate and deny service to. The weight of the mistake settled over him like a heavy fog. Eleanor took a slow breath, giving him a long moment to let it all sink in. Then she reached into her handbag, pulled out her phone, and, without breaking eye contact, pressed record. Her voice remained calm, cool, and deliberate. "I want you to repeat what you just said," she said, tilting her phone slightly so that both men's faces were in view. Thomas's hands twitched at his sides. Michael looked as if he wanted to bolt from the room. Eleanor continued. "Repeat it clearly," she said. "Say it on record, that you're denying my withdrawal because you're not familiar with me, even though I am the CEO of this bank." The heavy silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Customers had started to take notice. A few had stopped their own transactions to turn and watch. Some of the employees shifted awkwardly behind the counter, clearly uneasy with the situation unfolding before them. The power dynamic had shifted, drastically. Thomas opened his mouth, struggling to find the right words. The air of authority he had carried moments ago was crumbling, replaced with the unmistakable panic of a man who had just made a career-ending mistake. "Miss Carter," he started, forcing a strained chuckle. "I assure you, this was just a simple misunderstanding." Eleanor didn't blink. "A misunderstanding?" "Of course," he said, his voice too eager now, desperate to smooth things over. "If I had known who you were." Eleanor let out a small, humorless laugh. "So, you're saying the only reason I'm being treated differently now is because of who I am?" Thomas opened his mouth again, then closed it, clearly realizing there was no good way out of this. Eleanor turned slightly, angling her phone toward the entire bank lobby. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice sharp yet controlled, "I just want to make it very clear what happened here today. I, the CEO of this institution, walked into this bank, requested a standard withdrawal, and was met with immediate suspicion. I was denied access to my own money, questioned, and told I needed additional verification." She let her words hang in the air before continuing. "And yet, I have watched multiple customers today make much larger withdrawals without any scrutiny." A murmur spread through the lobby. Eleanor turned back to Thomas, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, Mr. Whitman," she said smoothly, "exactly how do you decide which customers require additional verification?" Thomas, his face going pale. Michael was staring at the ground, his fingers clutching the counter so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Eleanor took a step forward, lowering her phone slightly, but keeping the camera rolling. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice low, but loaded with meaning. "This is about every single person who has ever been treated unfairly, who has been made to feel like they don't belong in places they have every right to be." And it ends today. For the first time since the conversation had begun, Thomas didn't have a single thing to say. The silence in the bank lobby was suffocating. The once bustling atmosphere had turned into something tense, something unnatural, a sharp contrast to the forced politeness and efficiency that had once governed the space. Thomas Whitman cleared his throat, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Sweat had begun to form at his temple. "Miss Carter," he started again, his voice lacking the confidence it had earlier. "I assure you, this was just a misunderstanding." Eleanor's gaze remained steady, unyielding. "Oh, now it's a misunderstanding?" she asked, her voice smooth but laced with controlled indignation. She took a step closer to the counter, her phone still steadily recording, capturing every uncomfortable expression on the faces of those around her. "Because 10 minutes ago, it was your policy, wasn't it?" she continued. 10 minutes ago, I was just another customer who needed to be thoroughly vetted before I could touch my own money. 10 minutes ago, you were perfectly comfortable denying my transaction, assuming I was suspicious." Thomas's lips pressed together in a thin, uneasy line. He forced a strained smile, one that did little to hide the sheer panic creeping into his posture. "Let's just get this taken care of," he said quickly, a desperate attempt to move on from the catastrophe unfolding around him. The weight of his mistake was now fully settled in his mind. There was no escaping it. Behind the counter, Michael's hands trembled slightly as he pulled open the cash drawer. The young teller, who had moments ago been so dismissive, now couldn't meet Eleanor's eyes. The crisp bills were counted out mechanically, his fingers shaking as he stacked them neatly before placing them in an envelope. Eleanor watched in silence. Every motion was slow, deliberate. The difference in their behavior was stark, like night and day. Gone were the arrogance and false authority. In its place was the awkward shuffle of men who had been caught, men who had no defense for their actions. With one final glance at Thomas, Michael slid the envelope forward. "Here you go, ma'am," he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. Eleanor took the envelope without a word. She let the silence stretch, let them feel the weight of their choices. Then, with practiced poise, she turned back toward the phone she held in her hand, raising it slightly so that the camera captured the entire scene behind her. Her voice, though calm, was absolute in its authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, locking eyes with the camera, "let this be a lesson in implicit bias." The bank remained frozen, every eye in the lobby fixed on her. "This is my bank," she continued, her voice unwavering. "My name is on every employee's paycheck. I built this institution from the ground up. And yet, today, I was treated like a criminal for simply trying to withdraw my own money." She let those words sink in. A few customers standing in the background exchanged looks. Some nodded, some whispered. Michael looked as though he wanted to disappear into thin air. Thomas exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the counter in a white-knuckled grip. But no one interrupted her, because there was nothing they could say. Eleanor took a slow breath, deliberate and measured, before finishing with a simple statement, one that carried far beyond the walls of this bank. If you're watching this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because awareness is the first step to change. And with that, she turned on her heel, walking out of the bank without another word. The envelope of cash remained securely in her grasp, but in that moment, it wasn't about the money. It was about something much bigger. A reckoning had begun. Eleanor sat in her dimly lit home office that evening, her laptop screen casting a soft glow across her face. The video she had recorded at the bank played back one final time before she hit upload. She knew it would cause a stir, but even she wasn't prepared for just how explosive the reaction would be. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire across social media. Millions of views poured in, making it one of the fastest trending videos of the year. Thousands of comments flooded in, from everyday people sharing their own stories of racial profiling and discrimination in financial institutions. News outlets picked up the story, airing it on television segments, dissecting the implications of implicit bias in banking, and demanding accountability. Customers began threatening to close their accounts, outraged by the way Carter Financial Group had treated its own CEO. By the next morning, Eleanor's phone was ringing nonstop. Her executive team was in crisis mode. Emails flooded in from board members, employees, even prominent figures in the finance industry. Some were horrified. Others were scrambling to distance themselves from the disaster that had unfolded at one of their own branches. But for Eleanor, this wasn't about damage control. This was about making sure it never happened again. The very next day, Eleanor walked into Carter Financial Group's headquarters, not as a CEO looking to salvage an image, but as a leader determined to enforce real change. She wasn't interested in empty apologies or performative press statements. She wanted action. And that's exactly what she put into motion. Mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all employees, from tellers to top executives, ensuring no one ever made assumptions about a customer based on appearance. New customer service policies to guarantee equal treatment for all customers, regardless of race, gender, or social status. A direct line to the CEO's office, a hotline where customers could report discrimination or unfair treatment without fear of being ignored. Zero tolerance policy. Employees caught engaging in biased or discriminatory behavior? Fired. Immediately. The first example? Thomas Whitman. Within 48 hours, the branch manager who had humiliated Eleanor was terminated. Michael, the teller who had denied her transaction, was transferred to a different branch and placed under strict supervision. Eleanor made one thing clear to her entire company. This wasn't just about her. This is about every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background, she said in a follow-up video. This is about ensuring that when people step into a financial institution, whether they're depositing their first paycheck or withdrawing millions, they are treated with the same dignity and respect. Her words resonated far beyond her own company. Banks across the country started reassessing their own policies. Other CEOs were forced to confront the ugly truth about bias in their institutions. And most importantly, people started speaking up. For every Eleanor Carter who had the power to fight back, there were thousands who never had the chance. But now, they had a voice. 1 week later, Eleanor stood on the main stage of Carter Financial Group's headquarters. In front of her sat a room filled with executives, managers, and employees, the very people who were now responsible for ensuring that the toxic culture she had exposed never returned. She looked out over the crowd. Some of them were ashamed, avoiding eye contact. Others were determined, eager to be part of the change. And some still didn't get it. But they would, because she wasn't leaving any room for ambiguity. "This isn't just about bad optics," she began, her voice strong, unwavering. A hush fell over the room. "This is about integrity, about making sure that every person who walks into our bank is treated with respect and fairness." She took a deep breath, letting her words settle. If we want to be leaders in the financial industry, we need to do better. Not just because we got caught, but because it's the right thing to do. The room was silent for a moment. Then, thunderous applause erupted. Executives nodded, employees clapped. Even the skeptics couldn't deny the impact of what had happened. As Eleanor stepped off the stage, she felt something deep inside her, a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. She had built this bank from nothing, and now she was making sure it stood for everyone. If you believe in fairness and accountability, hit that like button, share this story, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-world lessons on power, leadership, and justice. Because change starts with us.